The candle beside me flickers, as if it too trembles with the weight of what I am about to say. I have sat in this convent for many nights, whispering prayers, reading scripture, or listening to the soft toll of the bell in the tower above. Yet tonight is different. Tonight silence feels heavier, as though it presses on my chest, demanding that I speak the words I have buried for decades. For most of my life, I carried a secret stitched so tightly into my soul that I could smile, nod, and even laugh while it gnawed at me from within. The world saw a devoted nun, a woman of discipline, a servant of God. What the world did not see was the child inside me who once cried into her pillow, begging heaven for deliverance. That child never truly left me. She has been waiting, pleading for me to give her voice. I have always believed that sins kept in darkness grow sharper with time, cutting deeper into the heart. Mine was not a sin of choice, but of silence. I let fear seal my lips. I let shame convince me that if I ever told, no one would believe me. That silence nearly consumed me. And so, here I am, with trembling hands and a voice that quivers, ready to tell you the truth at last. My name is Sister Lorraine Harkins. I have lived much of my life beneath these stone walls, wrapped in the rhythm of prayer, teaching, and service. But before I was Sister Lorraine, I was simply a girl with dreams of family dinners, laughter on summer evenings, and the comfort of an older brother who was supposed to protect me. Instead, it was that brother who turned my world into a place of shadows. He was not a stranger on a dark road, nor a nameless figure passing through town. He was flesh of my flesh, a part of my family, someone my parents trusted as their son, and I trusted as my guardian. The night he betrayed me was the night my childhood ended. I was raised in a modest home in a small American town. We were not rich, but we were bound by the rituals of everyday life, church on Sundays, chores in the yard, and the promise of supper waiting at the same wooden table each night. I was the youngest, the one everyone teased as the dreamer, the one who read too many books by candlelight and hummed hymns under her breath as she worked. I clung to faith even then, though I did not yet understand how much I would one day need it. My brother was older by several years, tall and strong in a way that made neighbors smile and say he would take care of us all someday. For a long time I believed them. He carried my books when we walked to school. He told me stories that made me laugh until I gasped for breath. To the world, and even to me, he was my protector. But there are moments in life when everything shifts with the quiet cruelty of a knife sliding through fabric, silent, swift, irreversible. I remember the day it happened, not because the weather was unusual or because the house was quiet, but because something in me sensed that safety had vanished. My brother's voice carried a different weight. His eyes lingered too long. His presence no longer felt like protection. That day carved a mark across my soul that no prayer could erase. It is difficult to describe how quickly trust can collapse. One moment you believe you are safe, the next you are adrift in a darkness you cannot name. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. I wanted to run, but my legs refused me. And when it was over, when the silence returned heavier than before, I realized I had stepped into a prison far worse than walls and bars. I was locked inside my own silence. From that moment on, I changed. My laughter faded. My smile became a mask. I learned to speak in measured tones, careful never to reveal too much. Every prayer I whispered in church carried the same desperate plea. Please, God, let someone see me. Please, God, make someone know. But no one knew, and I was too afraid to tell. Fear has many voices. My brother's threats became one of them. He told me no one would believe me, that if I spoke, I would be called a liar, that our family would break apart and everyone would blame me. At 13 years old, I believed him. I believed that the fault was mine, that somehow I had caused the very thing that destroyed me. I tell you this not to shock, but to confess what silence does. Silence is not peace. It is poison. It seeps into every corner of life, shaping who you become, strangling the child you once were until she can no longer breathe. For years I carried that poison. It shaped me. It haunted me. And it followed me even into the convent walls where I thought I might finally find refuge. But tonight, with the candle burning low and the shadows whispering across the stone floor, I break that silence. I tell you plainly, my brother took away my childhood and left me scarred forever. This is not an easy story. It is not one I ever wanted to speak aloud, but it is mine and I can no longer bury it. This is the beginning of my confession. And though it begins with betrayal, pain, and silence, it is not a story of defeat. It is a story of survival, of faith tested and nearly broken, and of a woman who chose at last to speak. Before the shadows entered my life, there was light. I remember mornings when the smell of fresh bread drifted through our kitchen, when sunlight fell across the worn wooden floor, and when my mother's humming filled the house with warmth. Those were the days I believed home was the safest place in the world. Childhood has a way of wrapping itself in simplicity, and for a time, I was wrapped in it fully. Our town was modest, a place where everyone knew one another, where Sunday bells called families together, and where the seasons marked the rhythm of our lives. In summer, children played until the sky turned pink, chasing fireflies in glass jars, their laughter echoing across the streets. In winter, we pressed our faces to frosted windows, waiting for the first flakes of snow that would blanket everything in quiet wonder. I was just another little girl in that landscape, innocent, curious, and easily delighted. Faith was stitched into our lives from the very beginning. My earliest memories are of kneeling beside my mother at church, the smell of candles and incense rising like invisible prayers. I remember clutching my small rosary, the beads cool against my fingers, believing that each whispered Hail Mary reached heaven like a personal letter to God. For me, religion was not just routine. It was comfort. I thought as long as I prayed, nothing bad could truly touch me. At home, I was the youngest, the dreamer of the family. I spent hours curled up in corners with books too big for my age, tracing words I barely understood, but letting them transport me into worlds far beyond our little town. My parents teased me for always humming hymns or talking to myself in daydreams. They said I had a gentle heart. I wore those words like a crown. My brother was already older, stepping into the kind of strength that made others nod with approval. Neighbors spoke highly of him, saying he would protect me, that I was fortunate to have such a sibling looking out for me. And in those early days, I believed them. He walked me to school, carried baskets for my mother, and sometimes ruffled my hair in a way that made me smile. I admired him. I trusted him. To me, he was part of the light. There were evenings when our family gathered around the dinner table. The sound of forks, scraping against plates, mixing with quiet conversations about work, neighbors, and church events. My father, tired but steady, would tell small stories from the day. My mother would scold me for forgetting to finish my vegetables. My brother would laugh, teasing me for my stubbornness. Those were moments I thought would last forever, ordinary, unremarkable, yet sacred. I remember summer Sundays most vividly. After Mass, we sometimes spread a blanket on the grass outside our house. My mother would bring bread, butter, and jam. My father would sit with his shoes off, finally at ease after long days of labor. I would lie on the blanket, staring at clouds drifting across the sky, imagining each one as a ship sailing into unknown lands. My brother sometimes joined me, pointing at shapes he saw in the clouds, castles, horses, faces. Back then, I laughed freely. Back then, I believed he truly was my protector. The world of my childhood was filled with tiny rituals of comfort. The smell of my mother's sewing, the tick of the clock on the mantel, the feel of clean sheets dried on the line. I lived in the gentle certainty that life was good, that God was near, that family meant safety. It is important for me to tell you this, because without knowing the light, you cannot understand the depth of the shadow that came after, even now. When I look back, I see those moments like stained glass catching sunlight, fragile, colorful, precious. They remind me of who I once was, a girl untouched by fear, still full of trust. That girl could not have imagined how quickly her laughter would be stolen, how suddenly her innocence would vanish. There were signs, of course, small shifts that I did not understand at the time. A lingering glance from my brother that made me uncomfortable, a change in his tone when he spoke, a sudden edge that replaced the easy laughter. I brushed them aside, telling myself I was imagining things. After all, how could I fear someone I had always trusted? How could I question the one the world told me was my guardian? I was too young to name what I was beginning to sense, too young to recognize danger hidden beneath familiarity. The house that had once seemed filled with warmth began to hold quiet moments that unsettled me. A shadow where there should have been light, a silence where there should have been laughter. But at that time, I still believed home was safe, and that belief kept me blind. The child I was could not know how quickly that innocence would be taken. There are moments in life when time itself seems to change its rhythm. For me, it was not thunder, nor a scream, nor a dramatic storm that marked the turning of my childhood into something unrecognizable. It was the quiet of an afternoon, the ordinary hum of a house that should have been filled with safety. That quiet became the setting for the first betrayal. I remember the day in fragments, the way the light fell across the floorboards, the sound of water dripping in the kitchen sink, the muffled footsteps in the hallway. I had been left to finish small chores, something simple and routine. My mother had stepped out to run errands, trusting the house would be watched over by those inside. I was not worried. Why would I be? I thought I was surrounded by family, and family meant protection. It was then that my brother entered the room. At first there was nothing unusual. He leaned casually against the doorframe, as though he had come only to check on me. But something in his eyes was different, sharper, and I felt it before I understood it. His voice carried a tone I had never heard before, a teasing that was not playful, a nearness that was not safe. At 13 years old, I did not yet have the words for danger when it wore the face of someone you loved. I only knew that my stomach twisted, that my chest tightened, that every instinct told me something was wrong. I tried to step away, to busy myself with the dishes, with anything that would keep a wall between us. But he followed. His presence filled the space, pressing in on me, and I realized that the world I trusted could vanish in an instant. "Don't be so nervous," he said with a smirk, as if the fear in my eyes was nothing but childish imagination. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the whole house might hear it. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. When he reached for my arm, I froze. It was not the grasp of an older brother guiding or protecting. It was something that turned my skin cold. I remember the shock most of all, the sudden collapse of everything I believed about safety. He was supposed to protect me. He was the one my parents said I could always rely on. And yet in that moment, he became someone else entirely, someone capable of shattering the fragile world of a little girl. I pulled back, whispered, "Stop," hoping he would laugh, step away, and realize the wrongness of what he was doing. But the look in his eyes told me he had no intention of stopping. My plea meant nothing. My fear meant nothing. And that was the moment I understood that trust can be broken without warning, and once broken, it can never return the same. When it ended, the house seemed impossibly quiet. I remember standing there, trembling, unable to move, staring at the sunlight on the floor as if the world had not just collapsed. My hands shook as I tried to wash the same dish over and over, the water running too hot, the soap slipping between my fingers. I thought if I could keep moving, if I could just keep washing, maybe I could pretend nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed forever. The girl who believed in safety, in family, in protection, that girl was gone. In her place was someone who knew that even the walls of home could not shield her, that betrayal could come from the very person meant to guard her. That night, I lay awake in my bed staring at the ceiling. I pressed the pillow over my face to muffle the sound of my sobs, afraid anyone might hear. My prayers were frantic whispers. Please, God, make it stop. Please, God, protect me. But heaven was silent, or so it seemed to a child desperate for rescue. When morning came, the sun rose just the same. The house stirred with its usual rhythms. My mother preparing breakfast, my father discussing the day's work. My brother acted as if nothing had happened, smiling, laughing, carrying on with the ease of someone who had nothing to hide. The casualness of it crushed me even more. It told me this was not an accident, not a single mistake. It was a choice, and choices can be repeated. Fear settled into me like a second skin. I avoided his gaze, avoided being in the same room, but houses are small, and routines are unyielding. Every glance he threw my way was a reminder. Every smirk, every casual word, every sudden silence carried a weight only I could feel. I began to shrink within myself, pulling away from the world, hoping invisibility might protect me. No one noticed, or at least no one asked. I forced smiles when required, forced laughter at the dinner table, forced myself to act as though nothing was wrong. Inside, I was unraveling, a 13-year-old girl carrying a secret far too heavy for her small shoulders. The first betrayal did not end in that kitchen. It marked the beginning of a pattern that would haunt me, an unspoken terror that lingered in the air of our home. It was the first time I realized silence could be a prison, and I had been locked inside. After that first betrayal, I thought perhaps it would never happen again. I prayed for it. I clung to the hope that maybe it had been a single terrible mistake that would vanish into memory. But it was not. Each day became a silent negotiation with fear, a waiting for footsteps in the hallway, a glance across the dinner table that made my stomach turn. Silence was the only shield I thought I had, and even that shield grew thinner with each passing day. Fear has a voice. It whispers at night when you try to sleep, reminding you of everything you cannot say. My brother made sure of it. He told me that no one would believe me, that I was the problem, that if I ever spoke, I would destroy the family. At 13 years old, I was too young to see those words for what they were, chains meant to keep me bound. Instead, I believed them, and those chains grew tighter with every passing moment. I began to move differently in my own home. I slipped into rooms quietly, kept my eyes down, avoided lingering in hallways. I wore long sleeves even in warm weather to hide the faint bruises, though no one ever asked why. My mother noticed I was quieter, but she brushed it off as growing up. My father was busy with work and responsibilities. To them, nothing seemed wrong. To me, everything was crumbling. At church, I knelt with my rosary clutched tightly in my hands, whispering prayers that blurred together in desperation. Please, God, see me. Please, God, help me. Please, God, send someone to notice. I searched the faces of priests and parishioners, hoping one of them might look at me long enough to see through the mask I wore. But no one did. I was invisible, even in plain sight. School offered no escape either. I sat in classrooms pretending to pay attention, but my mind drifted elsewhere, caught in the memory of what had happened and the dread of what might come again. Friends asked why I no longer laughed the way I once did, why my eyes seemed distant, but I brushed their questions aside. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? My brother grew bolder, not in public, but in the way he carried his power over me. A smirk across the dinner table was enough to silence me. A whispered reminder in passing was enough to make me feel trapped. His control was not only in what he did, but in the fear he left behind. Fear lived in me long after he left the room. I thought about telling my mother once. I remember standing in the kitchen, watching her peel apples, her hands moving rhythmically, her face calm. I opened my mouth to speak, to confess, to plead for help, but the words died in my throat. I imagined her shock, her disbelief, the anger that might turn against me. I imagined my father's stern face, his loyalty to his eldest son. I imagined the family breaking apart. In my young mind, silence seemed safer than destruction. So I swallowed the words and forced a smile when she glanced my way. That moment haunted me for years. One small chance to tell the truth, and I let it slip away. But I was a child, bound by threats and fear, and children often believe silence is survival. Nights were the worst. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the house. The sound of footsteps made my chest tighten, even if they belonged to my parents. I pressed my hands together, begging God to send me a sign, some proof that He still saw me. Yet each night ended in silence, and each morning I woke with the same dread. There were days I thought about running. I imagined slipping out the back door, disappearing into the streets and never coming back. But where would I go? Who would take in a frightened girl with no explanation? The thought of leaving only deepened the feeling that I had nowhere to turn. I was trapped by fear, by shame, by the walls of a house that no longer felt like home. I tried to lose myself in books, in chores, in prayer. Anything to keep my mind busy, anything to avoid the reality pressing down on me. But even in those moments, His shadow lingered. My life had become a performance, smiles at the dinner table, polite responses at school, dutiful prayers in church. Behind all of it was silence, a silence that screamed louder than any words. The prison of silence is not built with stone or iron. It is built with fear, with threats, with the belief that no one will believe you. It is a prison you carry inside, one that follows you everywhere, and I was locked inside it, with no key in sight. Looking back now, I see how much that silence shaped me. It taught me to hide, to shrink, to distrust my own voice. It nearly convinced me that my worth was nothing more than the shame I carried. But even then, buried deep beneath the fear, a small ember of hope remained. Hope that one day someone would notice. Hope that one day I would be free. There comes a time when the body and the spirit can no longer carry the weight of silence. For me, that time arrived slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I had carried fear inside me for so long that it began to seep into every part of my being. I woke each morning with a heaviness in my chest, a trembling in my hands, a dread that never loosened its grip. I told myself I was strong enough to endure it, that I could keep going if I just stayed quiet. But silence is not strength. Silence eats away at you until there is nothing left. The nights became unbearable. I would lie awake listening for every sound, waiting for footsteps that might or might not come. My pillow was damp with tears I could never let anyone see. I prayed harder than ever, whispering words into the dark, begging for protection, begging for escape. But when nothing changed, I began to wonder if even God had turned His face away. That thought terrified me more than anything. It was around this time that my body began to show the cracks. I was always tired, always pale, always too weak to finish my chores. My mother noticed that I pushed food around my plate more than I ate it. My father said I was becoming lazy. No one saw that I was unraveling. Even at school, my teachers wrote notes about my daydreaming and my lack of focus. They thought I was distracted. The truth was, I was exhausted from carrying a secret too heavy for a child. One night stands out above all others. I had been sick for days, fevered and dizzy, but I said nothing. I did not want to draw attention. That night, the fever rose until I could hardly move. My body shook, my breaths came shallow, and I thought perhaps this was the end. And a part of me welcomed it. If death meant escape, maybe it was not the worst thing. I remember whispering a final prayer, my lips dry, my voice barely audible. Lord, if you will not rescue me, then take me. But death did not come. Instead, I fainted in my bed, collapsing into darkness. When I woke, It was to the worried face of a nun from our parish who had come to visit our home. She had placed a cool cloth on my forehead, her eyes full of concern. "Child, you are burning with fever," she said softly. For the first time in years, someone looked at me not with suspicion or indifference, but with genuine care. That night was the beginning of the crack in my silence. I did not tell her the truth, not yet, but something inside me shifted. To be seen, even just as a sick child, reminded me that I was still human, still worth noticing. The darkness inside me was vast, but a small flicker of light had entered it. Still my brother's shadow loomed. His smirks, his whispered threats, his casual cruelty, they kept me locked in place. Even as my body weakened, even as my spirit cried out, I could not bring myself to speak. Fear remained my prison guard, reminding me of the punishment that would follow if I dared to tell. But illness has a way of breaking down walls that fear alone cannot. My body was betraying me, and in that betrayal, I began to hope that maybe someone would finally see what I could not say. The breaking point came one evening when I tried to stand and nearly collapsed on the floor. My mother caught me, startled by how light I felt in her arms. She asked what was wrong, and I opened my mouth to answer. The words that came out were not the full truth, but they were the first words of weakness I had allowed myself to speak. I can't do this anymore. She thought I meant the chores, the schoolwork, the endless tasks of daily life. But inside I knew I meant the silence. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange mixture of shame and relief. Shame that I had admitted weakness even in such vague words. Relief that for once I had not pretended. For once someone had seen that I was not all right. That tiny admission planted a seed. If I could whisper that much, perhaps one day I could whisper more. The days that followed were hazy, filled with rest and the gentle care of others. But even in that fragile state, my brother's presence remained. He lingered in doorways, his eyes cold, his threats unspoken but clear. I wanted to scream, to tell him he no longer had power over me, but fear still pressed against my lips like an iron seal. My silence remained, but it was weakening. The walls I had built to contain my pain were beginning to crack. The true breaking point was not a single moment of drama, but the slow erosion of silence until it could no longer hold. It was in the fever that nearly consumed me. It was in the fainting that forced others to notice. It was in the small words I whispered when I thought no one was listening. Piece by piece, the prison I had built around myself was beginning to crumble. Looking back now, I see that my body was the first to betray me, the first to cry out the truth I could not speak. The weakness, the fevers, the fainting, all of it was my body demanding to be heard. And in a way, it saved me. For without that breaking point, without that collapse, I might never have found the courage to let the truth begin to slip free. There is a moment when the truth begins to press against the walls of silence so fiercely that it can no longer be contained. For me, that moment did not arrive in a burst of courage, nor in a dramatic confession shouted to the world. It arrived quietly, the way a river swells after steady rains, rising until the banks can no longer hold it. My truth had been swelling for years, and by the time it broke through, it was not because I was ready. It was because I had no strength left to keep it inside. After weeks of weakness, fainting spells, and fevers, my body had become a fragile vessel. I walked through the days pale and trembling, my frame too thin, my eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Concern grew among those around me, though no one yet understood what lay beneath. My mother fretted over my appetite, urging me to eat more. My father scolded me for laziness. But there was one figure who did not dismiss what she saw. A nun from the parish, Sister Agnes, who often visited our home. Sister Agnes was not a woman easily fooled. She had eyes that seemed to pierce through the masks people wore. When she first placed her hand against my forehead and whispered that my fever was too high, I felt a strange mix of fear and comfort. She saw me, truly saw me in a way few ever had, and once seen, I could not go back to being invisible. It was during one of her visits that the first crack widened. I had been asked to rest in the small parlor, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside me. Sister Agnes sat close, her presence steady and quiet. For a long time she said nothing, simply watching me, her eyes filled with something I had not felt in years. Concern without judgment. Then she spoke softly, almost as if to herself. "Child, there is a weight on your shoulders that does not belong to you." Her words startled me. My hands tightened on the blanket. My first instinct was denial, the automatic reflex of survival. I shook my head and whispered, "I'm just tired." But even to my own ears, the words sounded hollow. She did not press me then. She only nodded and said, "When you are ready, God will give you the voice to speak." That night, I could not sleep. Her words echoed in my mind, louder than my brother's threats, louder than my own fear. A weight that does not belong to you. I had carried guilt as if it were my own, shame as if it were my doing. For the first time, someone suggested it was not mine to bear. That thought cracked something deep inside me. Days later, the truth began to seep out in fragments. It happened when my fever returned, leaving me delirious and half-conscious. Sister Agnes sat by my bed, whispering prayers, her hand resting gently on mine. In that haze of pain and exhaustion, my defenses crumbled. Words slipped from my lips before I could stop them. "He hurts me," I whispered, my voice so faint I was not sure she heard. But she did. I felt her hand tighten around mine, heard her breath catch. She leaned close and asked softly, "Who, child?" My lips trembled, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I could not speak his name, not yet, but the tears that spilled down my cheeks told her enough. She stroked my hair, whispering, "You are safe with me. No harm will come to you here." Those words broke me open. For years I had longed for someone to say I was safe, someone to promise protection. And though I could not yet tell the full truth, that promise was enough to let the silence begin to shatter. In the days that followed, Sister Agnes returned again and again. She did not demand answers. She simply sat with me, prayed with me, and reminded me that I was not alone. Slowly, I found the courage to speak more. I told her of the fear, the threats, the way I had carried guilt that was never mine. My voice shook with every word, but once spoken, they could not be taken back. And with every admission, the weight I carried grew lighter. Eventually, she insisted that my parents be told. I trembled at the thought, certain my father would not believe me, certain my brother would twist the truth. But Sister Agnes was firm. "Secrets fester in darkness," she said. "Truth may wound, but it is the only thing that can heal." The night of the confrontation is etched in my memory with painful clarity. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, Sister Agnes beside me. My mother's face was pale, her eyes darting between us in confusion. My father's jaw was clenched, his arms crossed over his chest. My brother sat in the corner, his expression unreadable, though I could feel his eyes burning into me. At first I could not speak. The words stuck in my throat, my chest rising and falling in panicked breaths. Sister Agnes placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You are not alone." And somehow, with her strength beside me, I found my voice. The confession came out haltingly, broken by sobs, but it came. I told them of the fear, the silence, the betrayal. My mother wept, her hands covering her face. My father grew red with fury, shouting questions, demanding answers, his disbelief warring with his anger. My brother denied it all, his voice smooth, his lies ready. But the truth once spoken cannot be swallowed back down. It hung in the air, undeniable, unshakable. That night, The fragile facade of our family shattered. There were no more dinners filled with laughter, no more summer afternoons of ease. Everything was broken. Yet in that breaking, something inside me began to mend. I had spoken. I had finally torn the gag from my own mouth, and though the cost was high, the relief was greater. Looking back, I see that discovery was not just about exposing my brother's cruelty. It was about reclaiming my voice, about learning that silence was never the answer. Sister Agnes became the vessel through which God reminded me I was seen, I was heard, I was loved. And though the road ahead would be long and filled with scars, that night marked the turning point. For the first time in years, I was no longer alone in my suffering. The truth had emerged, and with it came both devastation and the faintest flicker of hope. The night I finally spoke the truth, the walls of our home shook with something far greater than my trembling voice. Secrets are powerful. They can bind a family together in lies or tear it apart when they are dragged into the light. Mine did the latter. My confession was like a stone cast into still water. The ripples spread outward, and with each circle, the fragile structure of our family began to collapse. At first, there was only silence. I had spoken the words, halting and broken, and they hung in the air like smoke that would not clear. My mother's hands flew to her face as though she could block out what she had heard. My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as anger rushed in faster than comprehension. My brother sat with his arms crossed, calm, as if my words were nothing more than a child's fantasy. And I, shaking, breathless, tears streaming down my face, felt as though I had set fire to everything I had ever known. My father's voice was the first to break the silence. "Do you know what you're saying?" His words came sharp, like the crack of a whip. "Do you understand what such an accusation means?" I nodded, my throat too tight to form a reply. I understood all too well. For years I had feared exactly this moment, the disbelief, the rage, the possibility that the blame would turn back on me. My brother's denial was swift and confident. He leaned forward, his voice steady, his face a picture of wounded innocence. "She's lying," he said. "She's been sick, delirious with fever. She doesn't know what she's saying." He spoke with such ease that for a moment I feared they would believe him. He had always been the strong one, the dependable one, the son they trusted. I was the fragile daughter, the dreamer, the quiet one. Who would they believe? My mother's sobs filled the room, her tears falling like rain onto her apron. "Please," she whispered, looking from me to him. "Please tell me this isn't true." Her voice cracked with desperation, torn between two children she loved. She wanted to believe both of us, but the truth made that impossible. Sister Agnes, seated firmly beside me, spoke with quiet authority. "Children do not invent such stories. Pain like this cannot be feigned. I have seen her suffering. I have seen the toll it has taken." Her words lent me strength, but they also inflamed my father. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising. "You dare come into my home and tell me how to see my own daughter? You dare accuse my son?" I flinched at his anger, shrinking into my chair, but Sister Agnes did not waver. Her gaze held steady, her voice calm but firm. "I dare speak the truth when a child is in danger." "Silence has already cost her too much," the room erupted. My father shouted, my mother wept. My brother insisted I was confused or manipulated. Their voices clashed, a storm of disbelief, denial, and fury. And through it all, I sat trembling, feeling both freed and destroyed. I had spoken the truth, and in doing so, I had torn apart the family I once longed to protect. The days that followed were worse than the night itself. Our home became a battlefield of whispers, accusations, and cold silences. My father avoided me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. My mother moved like a ghost, wringing her hands, praying under her breath, unable to reconcile her love for me with her loyalty to her son. My brother carried on as if nothing had happened, his charm and composure a mask that convinced many. To neighbors, he was still the responsible young man, the pride of our family. To me, he was the shadow that haunted every corner of the house. Word spread quickly in our small town. Whispers followed me at church, in the marketplace, even in the schoolyard. Some people looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. I heard fragments of their doubts. She's just a child. Maybe she misunderstood. She's been unwell. Perhaps she imagined it. Boys will be boys. Maybe it wasn't so serious. Their words cut deeper than silence ever had. To them, I was not a girl who had spoken her truth. I was a disruption, a scandal, a stain on the image of our family. The betrayal of disbelief hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. To pour out the deepest wound of your soul only to have it questioned is a pain few understand. I had carried this secret for years, waiting for the moment of release, believing that once it was spoken, I would feel free. Instead, I felt chained in a new way, chained to doubt, chained to the labels others placed on me. But there were moments of grace, too. Sister Agnes remained steadfast, visiting often, reminding me that truth does not require the approval of others to be real. She prayed with me, held my trembling hands, and told me that God's justice was greater than any man's denial. Her presence was a lifeline, anchoring me when the storm threatened to sweep me away. Authorities became involved eventually, though not because my father welcomed them. Sister Agnes insisted that someone be told, that steps be taken to protect me. My father resisted fiercely, his pride wounded, his loyalty to his son unshakable. But the whispers in town grew too loud, the concern too visible, and at last he could not keep it contained. A formal investigation began. The investigation was its own kind of torment. I was asked to repeat my story again and again to strangers with stern faces and clipped voices. They looked at me with skepticism, asking for details I could barely recall, as though truth lived only in precise memory and not in the scars left behind. My brother denied everything with practiced ease, painting himself as the victim of a sister's wild imagination. Some believed him, some believed me, but the division itself was agony. At home, the tension grew unbearable. My father refused to speak to me most days. My mother oscillated between comforting me and scolding me for bringing shame upon the family. My brother grew colder, his mask of innocence slipping when we were alone, his eyes filled with venom. "You'll regret this," he hissed once in passing, and my blood ran cold. I had thought speaking the truth would free me, but instead it placed me in greater danger. Yet even in the midst of this collapse, something within me shifted. I was no longer completely silent. I had spoken, and though the consequences were devastating, I could not take the words back. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of power, not power that healed me instantly, but power that reminded me I was not entirely helpless. The truth had a voice, and that voice was mine. Still, the cost was staggering. My family was shattered. My father's anger, my mother's despair, my brother's denial. All of it tore the fabric of our lives beyond repair. The house that once held laughter now echoed with tension. Meals were eaten in silence or interrupted by shouting. Nights were filled with slammed doors and muffled sobs. We were no longer a family. We were fragments of one, sharp and broken. Looking back now, I understand that families built on lies cannot withstand truth. The truth may shatter them, but in that shattering, there is also the possibility of rebuilding something stronger, something honest. At the time, I could not see that possibility. All I felt was loss. I had lost the family I thought I had, the safety I once believed in, the innocence I could never regain. But I had also gained something, though it took me years to recognize it. I had gained the courage to speak, the knowledge that silence was not the answer, and the first fragile steps toward freedom. Sister Agnes's words stayed with me. Truth may wound, but it is the only thing that can heal. My family had been wounded, torn apart by the truth I carried. Yet in that wounding lay the beginning of my healing. The road ahead would be long, filled with more pain, more loss, more whispers. But the silence was broken, and once broken, it could never fully return. After the storm of truth tore my family apart, I entered a new chapter of life, one marked not by safety, but by distance. I was sent away, not so much out of compassion, but because the house could no longer contain the tension. My father's anger, my mother's confusion, my brother's denial, those things clung to every wall. And so arrangements were made. I was placed under the care of a convent school, where it was believed I would be safe, surrounded by prayer, discipline, and watchful eyes. The convent was a world apart from the house I had left behind. Its walls were cold stone, its halls echoing with footsteps and whispers of scripture. Days were divided by bells, one for prayer, one for lessons, one for meals, one for rest. To many, such order brought peace. To me it felt at first like exile. I had not chosen this life. I had been cast into it, wounded and trembling, clutching the fragile hope that distance might dull the pain. The nights were the hardest. Even in the convent's quiet dormitories, surrounded by other girls, my sleep was broken by nightmares. I would wake in a cold sweat, heart racing, certain that I could still hear his voice. The past clung to me like a shadow, following me even into the sanctuary of prayer. No amount of whispered psalms or candlelight could fully drive it away. I kept to myself, hesitant to make friends. Other girls laughed together, shared secrets, and whispered dreams about their futures. I sat apart, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my eyes lowered. They must have thought me distant, perhaps even proud. The truth was simpler. I did not know how to trust anymore. Trust had been stolen from me, and I could not yet imagine giving it freely again. But there were glimmers of light even then. Some of the sisters showed me kindness in small, steady ways. Sister Agnes visited often, checking on me with a gentle hand on my shoulder or a quiet question about my lessons. She never pressed me, never forced me to speak of what I was not ready to share. Her patience reminded me that not every adult sought to control or silence. There were those who truly wished to heal. Time became my reluctant ally. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and slowly I found a rhythm. The strict order of convent life, once suffocating, began to offer me structure. The bells that had once felt like chains became steady markers, pulling me forward 1 hour at a time. There was comfort in routine, even if my heart was not yet whole. Healing did not come quickly. My mind carried scars as deep as any wound. I often caught myself flinching when someone walked too close, or shrinking back when a voice grew sharp. Shame clung to me, whispering that perhaps I had been the cause of it all. It took years before I could truly believe the words Sister Agnes had spoken, that the weight was never mine to bear. There were setbacks. Letters arrived from home, filled with cold words from my father and pleading ones from my mother. My brother's name was rarely mentioned, but his shadow lingered in every line. Each letter reopened wounds, reminding me of the family I had lost, the love that had fractured. Sometimes I refused to read them, leaving them unopened beneath my pillow until I could face them without shaking. Yet alongside the pain, there were small victories. The first time I laughed again, really laughed, it startled me. I had almost forgotten the sound of my own joy. It happened during a lesson when another girl stumbled over a line of Latin and made a face so comical that I couldn't help but giggle. The sound felt foreign, like hearing an echo from a past life. But it was mine, and it gave me hope that not all of me had been destroyed. Prayer, too, began to shift. In the early days, my prayers were desperate cries. Lord, rescue me. Lord, make it stop. But as the years passed, those cries softened into something steadier. I began to pray not just for escape, but for strength. Not just for silence to end, but for courage to face what had already happened. Slowly, my prayers became less about fear and more about endurance. One of the most important steps came when I began teaching younger girls in the convent. At first, it was only small tasks, helping them with their reading, guiding them through simple prayers. But in their wide eyes and eager faces, I saw a reflection of the child I had once been, a child who deserved safety, trust, and innocence. In teaching them, I found myself healing, little by little. Protecting their joy became a way of reclaiming the part of mine that had been stolen. Still, healing was not linear. There were nights when the nightmares returned full force, when I woke shaking, certain I could still feel his presence. There were days when I wondered if I would ever feel whole, and there were moments of bitterness when I asked God why He had allowed such pain in the first place. But with each struggle came another step forward, however small. Healing, I learned, is not a destination but a journey, a long, uneven road that must be walked one day at a time. Looking back, those years at the convent were both the loneliest and the most formative of my life. I lost a family, but I found a community. I lost my innocence, but I began to gain resilience. I lost the certainty that the world was safe, but I discovered the deeper certainty that faith could carry me even when the world could not. The long road of healing did not erase the scars. They remained etched into my heart, a reminder of the pain I endured. But they also became a testament. Each scar whispered not just of betrayal, but of survival. Each scar reminded me that I had endured what once threatened to destroy me. And so, though I walked slowly, haltingly, and often with tears, I walked forward. I carried the past with me, but I also carried the faint, stubborn hope that someday I would find peace. For years, I carried the weight of his shadow in silence, even after I had spoken the truth. The words had been said, the family shattered, but inside me there still lingered a sense of unfinished reckoning. Healing had taken root in the quiet halls of the convent, yet deep within my heart lay an unhealed wound, the knowledge that my brother's voice still echoed in me. His threats, his lies, his cold denials, they had left a mark I could not erase simply by moving away. There comes a time, however, when survival is no longer enough. One must choose to live, not merely endure. And for me, that choice meant turning to face the very past I had spent so long running from. It began with a letter. I was older then, no longer the trembling girl of 13, but a woman shaped by years of prayer, teaching, and service. I had learned to steady my hands, to lift my voice in hymns, to guide others with words of comfort. Yet when I sat down to write, my hands trembled again, just as they once had. I wrote not to reconcile, but to release. The letter was not for his redemption, it was for mine. I told him that he no longer held power over me. I told him that his threats had ruled my childhood, but they would not rule my adulthood. I told him that while his choices had scarred me, they had not destroyed me. With every sentence, I felt the chains loosen, the poison drain. The words were steady, final, and sharp. I never sent the letter. I did not need to. Writing it was enough. Speaking those truths onto paper was a confrontation in itself. It was a declaration to myself that I had survived, that I was no longer trapped in silence. I tucked the letter into my Bible, between the Psalms of Lament and the verses of hope. It remained there, not as a message for him, but as a monument for me. Yet closure is rarely so simple. Memories returned often. His smirk at the dinner table, the way he twisted my fear against me, the disbelief in my father's eyes. For a long time those memories haunted me, making me feel small again. But with time, I began to speak them aloud, not only to myself, but to others who needed to hear. It started with small confessions during prayer groups, moments when other women whispered their own pains. I added my voice, telling parts of my story in fragments. Each time I spoke, I felt the chains weaken further. Shame lost its hold when truth was no longer hidden. I began to see that my survival was not just for me. It was for every girl who had ever been silenced. Every woman who had ever carried guilt that was not hers. Confrontation, I learned, is not always about facing the person who harmed you. Sometimes it is about facing the echo of their voice in your own mind. My brother's face may never have stood before me again, but his words lingered. No one will believe you. You are the problem. This will destroy the family. Those words lived in me far longer than his physical presence. The true confrontation was silencing that echo. There was one moment, years later, that stands out as a turning point. I was teaching a group of young girls in the convent school. One of them asked shyly, "Sister, why do you always tell us that our voices matter?" I paused, my throat tight, realizing that the answer was the very heart of my journey. "Because," I said softly, "I once believed mine didn't, and that nearly destroyed me." In their eyes, wide and unbroken, I saw the reason I had to keep speaking. If my story could give even one child the courage to use her voice, then my scars would carry purpose. My brother had stolen much from me, but he would not steal my ability to turn my pain into strength for others. Closure did not come in a single day. It came slowly, like dawn creeping over a long, dark night. It came in whispered prayers where I laid my anger at God's feet, asking for the grace to let go. It came in quiet moments when I stood before the mirror, no longer seeing the frightened girl, but the woman who had survived. It came in the laughter that returned, the friendships I allowed myself to form, the hymns I sang without fear. I do not claim forgiveness was easy, nor do I say it was always complete. Some wounds resist closure, flaring open when memories resurface. But I learned that forgiveness was less about him and more about me. It was about refusing to let his choices define the rest of my life. Forgiveness, for me, was not absolution. It was liberation. By the time I reached adulthood, I no longer trembled at the thought of his name. He became a part of my story, but not the whole of it. The power he once held had withered. I no longer feared him, no longer carried his voice inside me. The prison door had been unlocked long ago, but in confronting the echo, I finally stepped out into the light. And so, I closed that chapter, not by erasing it, for scars cannot be erased, but by declaring that it would not control me anymore. My letter remained folded in my Bible, a silent testament to the day I reclaimed myself. Each time I saw it, I remembered. The girl who once whispered in fear had grown into a woman who spoke in truth. That is what closure became for me. Not forgetting, not reconciling, but reclaiming. Confrontation was not standing before my brother demanding repentance. It was standing before myself, declaring that I was no longer his victim. I was a survivor. I was a daughter of God. I was free. As the years stretched on, I came to understand that healing was not a finish line to be crossed, but a path to be walked for the rest of my life. The scars of my childhood remained etched upon me, quiet reminders of what had been taken. But alongside those scars bloomed something stronger, resilience. And that resilience, nurtured by faith, became the foundation of who I am today. I found my calling not in forgetting my past, but in transforming it. Within the convent, I devoted myself to service, teaching children, comforting the sick, guiding the broken-hearted. Every face I encountered reminded me of what I had once longed for: safety, compassion, someone to see the pain hidden behind a smile. I made it my mission never to let a cry go unheard, never to let silence suffocate another soul as it had suffocated me. When I stood before my students, I saw their innocence shining like sunlight, fragile but radiant. I knew better than most how quickly that light could be stolen, and so I guarded it fiercely. I told them stories of strength, of truth, of courage. I reminded them that their voices mattered, that no one had the right to take their worth from them. In teaching them, I was teaching the younger version of myself, the little girl who had once believed she was powerless. Faith, too, deepened in ways I could not have imagined during those nights of fear. There was a time I believed God had abandoned me, when my prayers seemed to vanish into silence. But over time I realized that He had never turned away. His presence had been hidden in the small mercies, the hand of Sister Agnes on my forehead, the structure of the convent that gave me stability, the courage that rose within me when I thought I had none left. God's answers had not come as thunder, but as whispers, and those whispers had carried me through. Even now, when I kneel in the chapel and light a candle, I feel the weight of my story pressing gently against me. I do not light the flame for myself alone. I light it for every child who has ever been silenced, every soul who has ever carried a secret too heavy to bear. The flame flickers, fragile yet steady, a symbol that even the smallest light can pierce the deepest darkness. I often reflect on the paradox of my journey. My brother sought to break me, to bind me in silence, to leave me forever scarred. And yes, he left scars, but those scars became the very proof of my survival. What he meant for destruction became the soil from which strength grew. Pain had shaped me, but it had not defined me. Faith had reclaimed me, love had rebuilt me, and truth had set me free. In time, I shared my story more openly. At first, it was within small circles, whispered among women who carried their own burdens. Later, it became part of my ministry, spoken from the pulpit with trembling honesty. Each time I felt the old fear rise, but I pressed through it, knowing that silence had no power over me anymore. My confession was not about reliving the pain. It was about offering hope, and hope is what I wish to leave behind. If there is one lesson my life has taught me, it is this: no shadow, no betrayal, no silence is greater than the resilience of the human spirit. What is broken can find healing. What is scarred can still carry beauty. What is silenced can find its voice again. Now, as I write these words in the quiet of my cell, the candlelight dancing across the page, I am no longer the frightened girl who once begged God for rescue. I am Sister Lorraine Harkins, a woman who carries both wounds and wisdom. My childhood was stolen, yes. My innocence was shattered. But my life, my faith, my voice, my soul remained. And in choosing to tell my story, I reclaim every piece of myself that once felt lost. This is the legacy I leave: that silence must never be mistaken for peace. That truth is always worth speaking, and that even in the deepest suffering, redemption is possible. My story began with betrayal, but it does not end there. It ends here, in the light of faith, in the resilience of survival, in the quiet strength of a voice that refuses to be silenced ever again.